Hey guys, let's see, have we got anyone coming in yet? There we go. You can see some names popping up there. Um, I love it when I know I say each but I love how many of these names I know. It really does feel more like a community space than just me talking to a black screen. So I really appreciate that, and yeah, the community vibe. One day we'll be able to do some of these in person again, but in the meantime, when most of us are back in lockdown, I'm grateful I have the opportunity to share this with you. So great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to do a bit of an intro, but then we'll get over to our guests. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Kerrin Grosvenor. I work for Betfair in Australia. My role is to drive automation and analytical activity on the exchange. So basically, if you're interested in automation, bots, our API, historical data modeling, I run the team that's responsible for that, and I'm particularly passionate about this community and helping to educate and share knowledge within the space. So that's where these meetups come from. We started the beginning of COVID online. We'd been doing some in person before then, but then last April we moved online when everything else needed to, and we're still going strong. So really happy that's, I guess, the silver lining of the last 18 months for us is the development of these in our online community. So great to see you here. So tonight, what are we here for? Tonight, spring racing. Obviously, if you are a racing aficionado, as tonight's guests are, but also as a lot of our community are, this is Christmas, best time of the year. On the exchange, you might be interested to hear that for Australia, about 80% of our activity is on our racing markets. So it is quite a heavy focus for us. But particularly in the automated space, it's something people are pretty keen on, and something I often encourage people to start with if they're interested in modelling is racing all grades, purely because of the sheer volume of it. So, it's all well and good to get very good at AFL, there's nothing wrong with that, but at the end of the day, there's a fairly limited number of games in a season, and you have about as many races in a day as you have games in a season. So, it's much easier to have a test, implement, iterate, update cycle within racing than it is on sport. So from an automation and modeling perspective, it's definitely a good place to be, even if you have no fundamental interest in racing. So I guess backing up just a little bit before we go on to introduce our two guests tonight. So why are we here? Why are we doing this? Again, those who've heard from me before, it comes down to having a mission, a vision to create more winners. And that's what we're here for at Betfair Australia. And personally, like I said, it comes down to a passion for community and for knowledge sharing. I firmly believe that there is space on the exchange to have lots of people automating lots of different strategies without everyone, just taking from each other. So, and the more that we can share in this space, the more it empowers everyone and lets us get to where we're going a bit quicker. So as well as just being a fun thing to collaborate on and share instead of just doing it on your own. So that's why we're here. A couple other bits before we intro the guys. So if you aren't already part of the Betfair Quants Slack community, I do suggest that you join. Super active community, about 500 people on there at the moment. Community owned, great place to meet and connect with other like-minded people who are here doing similar things. I'll get Ivan to drop an invitation link in the chat box if you're not on there already. There we go. Feel free to follow that and join. Normally there's a chat that goes along with most of our meetups. Go into the meetups channel in there and you'll probably find it. If you're watching this on YouTube afterwards, feel free to hit up our team, automation betfair.com.au, and we can send you an invite that way if you prefer to. I think we need you on mute. There we go. Cool. I think we need both of them on mute, please. There we go. All right. So let me get back to where I was. Yeah. So yeah, join there. I think that's a great opportunity to talk about the meetup, but also you can connect with the guys who are talking tonight later on too, if you can. If there's anything else that we can do from our team to help you on your automation or modeling journey, please reach out. That's what we're here to do, is to help you on that journey and to make it more accessible to more people on the exchange. The final thing I wanted to shout out was on behalf of our data science team. We're trying to hire another data scientist for our data science team at Betfair. It's a really cool role and it's a really cool opportunity. And there are several people within the quants community who are ex-data scientists at Betfair. So it's an interesting place to have an opportunity to work. So if that's something that's relevant to you or to anyone you know, please feel free to share it. We'd really love that. We find that many of our best applicants come from within our wider community, and Ivan's a good example of that, our new starter in our automation team. So Ivan, can you share the link to that as well? Cool. Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me or to Kokum on Slack if you want to have a chat about that opportunity too. So finally, just a couple of things about tonight. So we've got Tom and Shaun joining us. We will have the chat functionality off, but the Q&A box will be open. So I encourage you to drop questions or thoughts in there as we go. The way we'll structure tonight, we'll start by doing a bit of intro to Shaun, and he'll share a bit of his journey, his experience, and then we'll talk to Tom, and he's got some modelling insights to share, and then we'll open to a Q&A. So like I said, have a think about your questions, drop them in there if you think about them on the way, otherwise drop them in the end. So without further ado, Ben, could I have Shaun, please? I love this. First time in my professional life, my tech things have gone off without a hitch, and it's all thanks to Ben. There we go. Hi, Shaun. So Shaun Beirne, anyone who doesn't know you probably doesn't know much about racing. Thanks for joining us this evening. I know you're a slightly different kettle of fish to our, let's say, normal guest, if we call normal people with a data science or development background. But despite that, you know a lot more about racing than almost anyone else I know. So thank you so much for taking the call and for joining us tonight.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure.
Are you happy to give an overview of your background and history, both in the industry and on the exchange, just for context?
Sure. So, lifelong, I suppose, involvement in gambling from family on the bookmaking side. Being in the corporate bookmaking world, quite a lot, and that business side of the world, and then interlace that with periods where I've spent, a complete focus on to gambling or racing or supporting myself through trading. So it's been quite a varied journey, picking up a lot of different skills and a lot of different experiences. And I probably was a lot more a sports punter for a long time. I used to interchange the both, and certainly sport took on a far bigger part of my trading. That was likely prior to the minimum bet rules coming in. Since the minimum bet rules have come in and the likes of Betfair, I've certainly swayed now back to racing, and particularly thoroughbred racing, and that suits my skills set, but also allows me the opportunity to actually transact and do what I'd like to do. The sport now is almost the other way, whereas I used to be able to get good bets on the sport, particularly with the overseas operators going by the wayside, and it's actually turned that into now something that I barely even bet now. So racing for me now, from a trading perspective, is my sort of basic focus. As you said, I'm not someone that has a data science degree. I'm not someone that's able to automate necessarily what I'm doing, and I don't really choose to. I've been down those paths. I've tried different things, and for me, I've come back a little bit more to a simplistic methodology, in that I have clearly have a proprietary system, or access to as a family proprietary system, that provides me an extremely good answer as to what I'm looking for on a probability of a horse. So to me, that's the starting point, is to come with that probability. I think you touched on an interesting thing that I was going to talk about, and we can talk about a little more. But the difference of opinions, there's different ways to do things, difference of opinions, and so on and so forth. So, it's been an interesting journey now back to where we are with the racing. My focus, particularly on a Saturday, would be Betfair. My focus during the weeks would potentially be elsewise. And as you said, I've worked at many different places. I've been the head of sports betting and bookmaking departments, and also, just tried to help people with modelling and automated services. And so, it's very interesting time.
And obviously part of that journey was working at Betfair once long ago.
Yep. So I worked at Betfair for, we came in there, and a team of 4 of us. I think we started in the meeting room to set up the Betfair risk department. So that the actual bookmaking facility that Betfair had for a few years. So that worked well. Actually, it was flying and doing really good numbers. And then it went into the Crown when Crown took the full thing with Betfair. It went into the Crown Crown Bet situation. So. Betfair is certainly an interesting and good, fun place to work. Still quite a few there, although a lot have moved on, including the ex-CEO now. So, so moved on exactly. He even got out of Melbourne. He couldn't stand it any longer. Betfair I must say, it was an enjoyable place to work, and there's still a lot of, you like yourself, good, smart people there. And it's just a different concept. It's funny, even though I talk to my friends, a lot of my friends, or most of my friends, I should say, aren't particularly gambling inspired. But even for them that do have a few bets, it's funny that they still find the Betfair kind of ecosystem a little challenging. So it's quite an interesting, it can be. So it's quite interesting, and I can understand why to some extent. Yeah, but it's an acquired knowledge. It's an acquired love, I think.
And so over that journey, so been around the traps a while. How have you seen things change, develop? How would you? Are there things that have changed in how you interact with the markets over time?
Well, I think many things have changed. So obviously, as I said, the introduction of Betfair, the introduction, even just the accessibility to prices, and being able to bet from home. I grew up with uncle, father, grandfather, all bookmakers. It was all on track. The archetypical marketplace, that's where it was. Shifting it online, of course, it's not really any different. It's just a matter of understanding it's the same philosophy. You sit with all those markets now in front of you. The interesting thing for me has been I suppose, what inverted commas, the English bookmaker mentality that's arrived here. I mean, it's changed the way the market works and the way the market acts. I think that right as of now, it's a very interesting way that the bookmakers they all, we know, are basically plagiarising each other. The market is, basically set by one price, and then everyone mimics. Now, I understand the reasoning for that. They're keeping their percentages up and everything. The interesting thing to me is how efficient the market is or is not at the moment. And I've got a pretty decent feeling or strongish feeling that the market, aside from those last few minutes, is quite inefficient at the moment. So it's an interesting time now to, again, probably why I've come a little back to simplifying what I'm doing to some extent, and looking and trusting my numbers, and then using the market to show me those angles. And certainly the fact that now that we can actually all bet again via the minimum bet rules. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, people were able to bet and people had an opinion. Well, now there's no opinion. The bookmakers don't have an opinion realistically, and their staff are not allowed to have an opinion in basic sense. So it's been good and bad. For barriers to entry as a bookmaker, that's sort of good, because there's a lot of these automated tools that they can all use. For people with an opinion that used to work for the bookmakers, that's kind of seen them and myself to some extent off to different challenges. But it's certainly an interesting position now with the market. I really enjoy playing into the market now, and I like betting with bookmakers, and I like betting with the exchange heavily on Saturdays, particularly. And it has certainly got to a point where, well, I think one of the things is it does evolve. It evolves and changes and moves. The market moves constantly. The market can evolve. It's interesting. I think sometimes the market lags, so we start to see changes in the way that things are interpreted. A lot of the media tend to get hold of an angle on something, and you see a lot of the racing media now focused on one sort of trajectory of how everyone is looking at the form. And so if you then transgress and look at it from a different way, I think you can gather an angle or different angles. So that data and that ability to go into the market in various different forms, is enjoyable, and I think profitable.
So for you and I've talked about this before, but you start with effectively a rated price, right? That's produced from a set of inputs that you've had quite a lot of involvement in generating, and then goes away. Basically, I've got a model, spits out a rated price.
Yep.
Now, as we've talked about on different meetups before, that's not even halfway through the process by getting a rating. And rating's really only the starting point, right? What do you do with that rating? Because this is so much what we talk about. Once you've got your model, what do you do with it? How do you then take that and, I guess, strategize around taking that and turning into something that's profitable or not losing, depending on how you look at this? And obviously you're doing this manually, but it doesn't, at one level, it doesn't matter whether you're doing it manually or automatedly. You have to come up with a strategy of how to bet your model, right? And I know that, that's changed for you over the years, but currently high level, which bits are you able to share of how you go from your rating to something actually hitting the market when you choose to bet things?
I mean, so when my betting is not automated, but certainly the process to get to that probability, predicted probability for each runner is automated. Then that's when I think, you use that number, but you have to use that number with then a sense of what the market is telling you. So, for example, if I've got a horse, and if I've got two horses in two different races and they're both 3-1, and the market is, I'm watching a market that one runner presents first up from a spell, and one runner presents third up from a spell, or fourth up, and they're both in the races where there's a fair quantum of number of runs for each of the runners, because with my the way that I'm looking at it, I need some data behind each runner to place or to be able to provide a rating and a solid rating on the actual horse.
Rubbish in, rubbish out, quality in.
So
out.
So and I know there's people that might bet on maidens. Well, I wouldn't have more than 5 bets on a maiden in a year. And class ones even, I very rarely bet into. So I need some of that data to be able to create pattern or create what I want to do. But back to the point, if I'm witnessing the market be very weak against a horse that's first up, now I'm not going to let that horse go around and not necessarily have $1 on it, but I'm certainly not going to back it as a 3-to-1 chance. So whereas the horse that I have very good data about and I'm very comfortable with, even if it is an easing in the market for some reason, I'm going to bet it more strongly than what I would bet if there is a horse that has other factors that I do not know about or that I can't quantify.
So you're saying
or are difficult to quantify because I don't measure trials. I don't watch all the trials. I don't run any numbers over the trials. So that's when you start to develop a subjectiveness to some extent over how and when you invest. So that's how I suppose I take into other things into account. And again, there may be a horse in a race that I don't have a good feeling for that's only had 1 run or 2 runs or is first up from overseas. That's very common. So you need to be able to adapt your own thinking in that. And that's what I think, is probably one of my strengths, is that interpretation of the end product. And you would talk about the differing opinions. People can be given the same set of data and come up with wildly different outcomes, and that's
what we all do.
And that's great, and that's fantastic, because otherwise the market wouldn't exist realistically.
Yeah, it'll be stagnant.
So that's how I would treat that. That's kind of obvious in saying that something, first up. What I'm trying to avoid is putting myself into situations where the market has a clear edge or a knowledge edge that I don't have, and being disaffected by that.
It's funny because we talk about this quite a lot with a lot of the model guidance in the space who are automated, and whether they take the opinion of the crowd into account or not with what they do, and that opinion varies pretty significantly. Like some people, like you know, if it's too far off, that they will say there is such thing as too much of a good thing, and that can be that actually it's that they know something that you don't. As you said, maybe they watch the jump outs, maybe they know something that you don't. Whereas others go, I like my rating, damn it, and I'm gonna and things better. But that's part of that opinion too, right?
It's an information gap. So if you and look, I have things all the time where I sit and look and say, well, what is the market looking here? Why is the market got this so short? Or why have I got this so short, and so on? And you will come to see that there are, even if you're just doing it from a data point of view, you'll see that there's a higher error rate in your data in certain pockets of data.
XYZ step.
Yeah, correct. And so there's different parts of your data, your systems and data systems that will have stronger, or less data error than what will others. And so it really is down to that mentality, carrying that mentality into then when you're investing and when you're betting and when you're deciding to put your money down. And so that is, I want to be able to be pretty clear on everything. Track bias is another thing. It's kind of a buzzword, but we've been looking at that, and for many years before a lot of people were. Wind impact on horses is now starting to become quite a common discussion point. Again, that's been something that we've acknowledged for many years. Maps, well, with all due respect, Dominic probably invented that, the idea of mapping horses. So again, that's a very strong input into what I do. So all of these things then affect what I think of the probability of a horse. And I guess that's where I'm looking at the individual race, the individual horses within the race, and treating that as an individual puzzle rather than the massive large data set to then look at, that sort of, from that angle, horses that fit that pattern. I'm trying to look for the horses that are just best patterned to win, this event, or specific event. And there's plenty of good market indicators. I think if you become witness enough to watching the market, and you can certainly use data to support it. There are certainly a lot of, and I'm not just talking about, oh, well, clearly this horse is starting the firm, so I'm going to run over there and try and back it there. It's trying to bet prior to the firms, or indeed starting the firms yourself. One of the things I do like to do in Betfair is sort of sample. If I'm wanting to put, $1,000 on a horse, if I'm wanting to put X on a horse, I like to sample in small denominations at different times. And that provides me with an understanding as to how strongly I think the market will hold up or will not hold up. It's quite a good way to see it. The other thing is there's always a market underneath the prime market on Betfair. So whatever you're seeing, there's another market bubbling away underneath. So again, if there are ways to try and sample into that to see what some of the bigger syndicates that have got their bots bubbling away underneath the surface,
what their opinions are.
Yes, you can kind of start to go into that and sample the market, and you will quickly start to learn which horses may or may not firm. Now, I'm not doing that on every runner, every race, every day. I'm just doing that on the horses and races that interest me.
That is a particularly interesting one. We'll probably come back to that later. Thank you very much, Shaun. I'm going to swap across to Tom just so we've got a chance to talk to him before we open up to questions. But thank you. And guys, have a think about which angles you want to pick Shaun's brains on. Now we're going to go from one extreme to very much the other, and I think this is a particularly interesting part tonight. So, Tom,
hi.
You come from a slightly different background to Shaun. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
So what's your background? Thanks for being here, by the way. Appreciate it.
No worries, of course. I guess in terms of racing, I first got into it probably in a similar way, in that I was very young, and my dad introduced me to horse racing. One of my early memories I have in that space is when I think I was 15 or so. I was actually at the Darwin races with him, and he gave me $2 to put on a horse, and ended up jagging a 50-1 winner on that, which much to his astonishment and all his mates as well. So that was my kind of first experience, which was pretty awesome, to be honest.
Always a nice start, and went downhill from there.
Yeah, well, to be honest, yeah, basically. But no, to be honest, I never really punted for a long time after that. I went away and did all my studies, and then only revisited it once I kind of got back into an interest in machine learning came up. But my academic background is in electrical engineering, math, and kind of computer science. So I've studied very technically. I never worked as a software engineer though, but certainly having those skills and being kind of developing as a hobby has been very useful. I guess I worked as an electrical engineer for a number of years, and then eventually I kind of found the Kaggle platform and rediscovered my interest and passion in data and technology and algorithms. So in the early days, I was doing tons of Kaggle competitions and just absolutely loved it. So since then, I pivoted my career across into data science, and then got back into the gambling world. I actually took a job with Sportsbet. So I was a quantitative data consultant there, which was...
What a title.
Yeah, it was a bit funny. I was actually in the marketing team, but it was actually really awesome. I learned so much, and kind of sparked my interest in punting again. So yeah, that was pretty exciting. It was a massive change of pace from the electrical engineering world as well. So, but yeah, it was great. After that, I did a small stint at Domino's for a few years, and most recently, I've started my own startup. So I'm a co-founder, and the startup's called, yeah, very much so. It's called X Functions, and yeah, so we're building
that's in the technology space too, right?
Yes, yeah, we're building an automation platform to allow businesses and individuals to put together their own serverless, event-driven workflows. Actually,
feels relevant.
Yeah, definitely. It's very closely aligned to automation and the community that we have here. So it's actually yeah, very cool. Once I'm ready, I'm very excited to implement my own betting bot in the platform, which would be
beta
cool.
testers, guys.
Yeah, exactly. I'll definitely reach out because we'll be needing them.
I'm sure we'll be happy to help.
Yeah.
So in terms of your activity on the exchange, you said that it sort of came along, from that it was more of a love of the modeling, right? That you came at it from that angle.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You're always trying to solve a challenge, right? That is how it feels like when we talk.
Yeah, for me, it's about playing with new technology and tools and implementing them into like a real problem, not like a toy puzzle. So I actually got across to I think it was around 2017. I was looking back through our emails, and that's when I got my API access set up. Actually, no, it was later than that I got API, but I think back then is when I started my own automated betting system. And back then I was it was all a hobby, which it is still today. But back then I was using VMs in the cloud, and I was using browser automation with Selenium and Chrome, and yeah, it was super unreliable. I had a fairly small amount of success. I think I was using Bet365, but pretty minor, and it was terribly unreliable. So yeah, I think around 2019 is when I got my Betfair API access and started kind of full automation with serverless architecture as much as possible as well. And yeah, just since then I've been building and tuning the pipelines. I think it took me about a year of development to get to a profitable system.
That's not unusual. That's a fair number, 12 months.
Yeah, although I would say even to now, I've been running sort of a year since it's been profitable, and even now I'm finding that it kind of slips in and out.
Oscillates.
Yeah, like the edge might disappear, or there might be changes in the underlying data sources which cause all sorts of issues. Yeah, so it's not like as sort of build it once and then leave it and forget it. It never works out that way.
No, I don't think anyone in the automated world can claim that.
Yeah, 100%.
I think one of the most interesting things about you and what you do is you said you love new stuff. So like every time we talk, we've got some newfangled, weird and wonderful approach that you're taking normally before I hear anyone else talking about it. So I love that part of what you do, and I'm very much hoping that we're going to be able to collaborate down the track on some more sort of targeted I guess tutorials and workshops where we can dig into that a bit more deeply. But in terms of what you've been working on recently, have you got something a little bit different to share, to throw out as a thought point?
Yeah, I'll just jump over to my slides actually. Give me
You're
2
very
seconds.
visual. I love that, because so am I. So that works for me.
100%. Did that come up for you?
Yes, imbalanced data.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you and Shaun were talking earlier about that problem of there just being like uneven samples and not enough information in certain areas. So like this is sort of a pretty old technique now. I think it's in statistics, it's been around since the early 2000s. But in classification algorithms in machine learning, there's this problem with imbalanced data. And it's in the case of racing, like it's really obvious. Like the first thing you do as a modeler is go, I want to predict who is the winner, and we've got a race with 20 horses, but there's only one winner. So there's just this natural imbalance in the outcome, and you just don't have as much information about winners because there aren't as many of them. So if we kind of consider these charts, which I've borrowed from this blog post here, but if you just consider these charts, the color of the dot might represent the outcome of a horse and its race. So the red dots would be the winners potentially, and the blue the losers. This is not horse racing data. This is made up, so don't think it is at all. But this is for the illustration purposes. The X and the Y axes on this graph might represent two predictive variables that we have. They're obviously normalized to some degree. And then the shading represents what our model has learned to and what its predictions are. So you can see in the case on the left chart where we've got a lot of red points and a lot of blue points, that the model has created this decision boundary, and it's gone, okay, when X and Y meet these are on this side, I'm going to predict the horse will win, and when it's on this side, I'm going to predict that the horse is losing. And we can see that it separates the data quite nicely into the two classes of predicting winners and losers. On the right-hand side, not so good. We've got only a very small number of winning data points. So our data set is really skewed and biased. So the classifier is having a lot of trouble, and it's just saying, all right, I'm going to predict everyone to be a loser. So this is sort of a classic problem in machine learning and classification algorithms. And the reason that it is a problem is that inside, what the ML algorithm is doing is for every row in your data set, it's making a small adjustment to the model via an iterative procedure. And so what that means is that each row or point observation is being treated the same and has the equal chance to impact what the model is learning. So basically what that means is that when you have imbalanced data, the model is learning more about the majority class, which in this case is the losing horses. Yeah. So basically what you do to address this is you do something called resampling. And this simply means drawing multiple samples from a single data set with the aim of adjusting this balance and improving the performance of the algorithm. So you can do that either by oversampling the minority class, which would mean repeatedly choosing the same winning horses over and over again, or you can undersample the majority class, so throw away some of the losing data.
And Tom, obviously this is going to be your next point, but how do you do that without overfitting? For me, that's the big flashing light. Like, how are we not just, biasing our model towards information we know ahead of time, but we don't necessarily, we know in arrears, but don't necessarily know in advance. Yeah.
So this is still in the training step. We're not going to be doing this in the testing phase, or validation. And you definitely don't want to be kind of duplicating and creating false data sets when you're doing testing or validation. So you're just purely doing this on the training data set. And I would say that you actually do want to bias your model. You want to make it so that it's more nuanced in how it's dividing winners from losers, and not learning too much from just the losers, but also getting a lot more information out of the winners. So you actually are deliberately biasing your model towards winning horses in this case. So
that's interesting. Really interesting.
Yeah, it is an interesting point. So it's not going to be ideal if, in the case where you want a probability estimate that is balanced across all probability ranges, because what this is going to do if you oversample the winners is it's going to add bias towards the shorter probabilities because they're more likely to win. Also, I would note though that even if your data, you did not apply this to like a target variable, so the same principle would still hold. So what I mean there is that if you wanted to use track conditions, for example, you could there's a lot more good 4 races than there are heavy 10s. So you might want to create a data set where you duplicate your heavy 10 races so that it learns, your model is learning more about wet races, and you're deliberately biasing it in certain directions. And that's a good way to find edges.
Yeah, so your wheel doesn't have a straight edge that goes clonk periodically. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the slightly more fancy techniques, for doing this is called SMOTE, which is short for synthetic minority oversampling technique.
You were the only person who would know that.
People like to come up with the kind of really obscure names, but this one's kind of good. But basically, what you do in this algorithm is that you rather than simply duplicating the sampled observation exactly as it was, you take that observation and you find its nearest neighbors in the same class and then generate a line that exists along the boundary between those points. So you can see in the middle chart how the fake winning data points have been created somewhere along the line in between the two existing real samples. So yeah, and this basically ensures that your new synthetic observation is internal to your existing samples in your whatever dimensionality or space that you're using, which is your feature space. So what you're doing is you're adding weight to the minority class, and you're making it so that your decision boundary that the classifier learns becomes more generalized. At least that's what they say in their paper anyway.
I want to know what the E stands for.
Yeah, it's super
Synthetic
weird.
minority oversampling technique.
Yeah, they didn't.
I think
add
they're
an
just
E
trying to
on the
be,
end.
because they don't want to be smart. Okay, they're just trying to be clever.
Yeah, maybe they're turning it into a verb, so you can say I've just smoted my data or something like that. I don't know.
I love data scientists. They're the best. Good God.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, really. I mean, you're just creating additional data observations. In this case, you might duplicate your winners using this technique to create different observations, and that way you're with the aim that your model can be biased towards winners. So definitely kind of worth considering, but also keep in mind though that if you take your probability estimates are definitely going to be biased after you apply this, and you do not want to do it on the test or validation data sets, because it's going to screw up all your normalization and probability calculations afterwards as well.
But I mean, we've talked about this before, and we talked about in our last meetup with Bruno about the value in generating new features, right, and generating and testing new features, and that's surely part of what you can work through in a process like this, is how you think about and get to those new features and then play with them, and if you can learn something about your winners, those who've been classified that way, that you didn't know before and wasn't evident within a straight data set, maybe that gives you insight to go and dig it a little deeper in another direction.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, like there's a bit of a movement happening at the moment that's like, I think in machine learning, everybody for a long time has been focused on let's generate new features, and it's all about creating the best features, and that's going to improve our model. Although, and I definitely agree with that. Like you need to be on the hunt for great features all the time, but there's other ways to improve your model as well, and you can do that by tweaking your data set, removing bad samples, cleaning, making sure your pipeline is really tight and not generating bad data in there. Like I think there's when I've looked back over my system more recently, I've found a lot of problems with the data pipeline, and that's something I'm going through at the moment and tidying it up. But doing things like this, different types of sampling techniques, is another way to get really, really good gains out of your models, just purely by feeding them with better data, or data that's deliberately focusing on a particular angle.
No, I think that's a good take, and we might take that as a basis of a more in-depth conversation later.
Sounds good. You there, KG?
I think Kerrin's frozen there. We'll just try to get her back in a sec. Hang on. It's the first.
Yeah, that's all I had about resampling and smote. And so I think we might be on to questions.
Yeah, did you want to take some of those questions, Tom? And actually, I'll add Shaun back in as well.
Yeah, so there's a question on me, for me here. Do you favor one row per race or one row per horse, or something else in your ML model? So I guess I would answer that with...
are the best. My computer turned off.
Oh, no.
My computer turned off. Obviously, I biased myself earlier by saying that I was having a good tech run. Thank you for jumping in, guys, for catching us. But sorry, Tom. So you were looking at one of those questions that came through about the rows per race or runner, right? When
Yeah,
did you get
so
to that?
yeah, I build it on a row per horse race. So each row represents a horse and its run in a single race. I have looked at a row per race arrangement, but for horses, it's not really great because the number of horses varies so much. So you'd have a lot of padding to get out to the total number of runners. I think it's better for greyhounds potentially, but I've tried both in greyhounds, and my still one row per dog race works better than the one row per race structure.
That's interesting. I think most people I work with would say the same. I've tried both. I'd agree. Go on, aimed at you here, Shaun, from Ewan, saying, can you expand on your point around track bias? So he says, do you think it's overvalued? Can it be used as an effective input, in your opinion, or does the market react too efficiently already as soon as the bias is established? And there's an extension that, do country track biases go undetected potentially?
So, yeah, I don't think it's overvalued. No, I certainly don't. It's still fascinating to me, and comes back a little bit to what I've talked about previously in the intro. The market seems actually to lag a little bit, in my opinion, on identifying track bias. However, because the prices with fixed odds and sort of the, in the whole ecosystem, be it fixed odds or be it Betfair, they tend to hang around for longer than what I would think. So I think there's some really good opportunities for later races in a day once you start to see a track bias unfold. Now, the flip side is people are reaching for track bias very, very quickly. So there is an assumption that there is going to be a bias almost all the time, and it's far from the truth. So I find it fascinating for people who to quickly assume a bias when I don't see it. Now, that's not to say that what their opinion isn't valid, but you can't go in with I guess a preconceived idea that there is going to be a bias and try to read it. You have to look at it, each race on its own merits, and understand whether there is a bias. And of course, a rail bias may not be a rail bias that you have to lead. It may be a rail bias that you can be third, fourth, fifth along the fence. And they're the type of biases that I look for. There's very much far too much consideration from a track bias point of view in where the horses cross the line. Whereas I am taking into context where the horses are from the start of the race to the end of the race. And not purely in that that final, furlong sort of thing.
Or how they're
it can have an effect. Yes, you need to be considering of all the elements, not just this horse wins, and they're all the horses are 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 off the fence. At the finish line, you need to be considering where they are when they're expending their energy. And throughout the run,
that then lets
and
them,
where they are when they're trying to gain momentum, and where they are when they're all tiring and getting to the line isn't going to be necessarily the great predictor of bias. So the market, I think, can lag in its reaction to it. And again, I think a lot of it is that the bookmakers or the corporate bookmakers are waiting for the punting fraternity to act. They're not making change prior to someone actually having a bet with them. They're responsive rather than being proactive, and so they're also not going to start to push horses. As a bookmaker, if I know that there's a strong bias against the rail, if I'm a bookmaker and I know this horse now is going to be fourth or back on the fence and there's a hard on pace bias, I'm willing to push that horse out in price, but that just doesn't exist anymore. So to that extent, I think that the market lags quite significantly on bias. But to answer the question, so that's whether it's efficient. I think it's inefficient. However, and I think that people do go too quickly to assume a bias, and people like to find a reason that their horse loses too. Often the reason the horse loses is put down to something that you like to make up for a reason. Country track bias is different. Country tracks, does it go undetected? Well, no, not necessarily, but I think it's the same thing. I think the market is not, the bookmakers are not reactive. So there is still opportunity to see that, and you see a lot more biases on the country tracks, and for natural reason. I mean, there's less money spent on less, well-kept tracks and so on. So I would still think there's much value in being able to determine a track bias, but I would suggest that people don't take the simplistic approach of looking where the horses are when they hit the line.
I like that. That's a good insight and something that we can take off. Yeah, people can consider. Tom, one for you. What are your thoughts on the best way to compare a particular horse, jockey, trainer combination of stats to those of the rest of the field? Is that something that you have looked at or have an opinion on?
Yeah, to be honest, the way I would deal with this would be to split out as I guess granular as possible the different combinations of stats into their own features before I feed it into the model. So I'm answering this from how I incorporate that data into my model, which is basically splitting it out into its own separate columns. That being said, one thing I do in creation of form is compare back to see, has this horse jockey combination occurred? Well, I mean, usually horses stay with the same trainer for a decent amount of time, although not always. But so, and I find when you're doing that, if you start to go if you start to go very, very specific, like if you went, horse, jockey, distance, track, condition, you're getting very, very specific about the combination, and you just start to run out of data or observations for that particular combination. So I try to find some balance between not going too specific while keeping a reasonable sample size in the average or the estimates that the statistics I'm trying to generate on what's happened. Yeah, and then as for how that's the first part, and how I compare that to the rest of the field, I mainly go by normalization. So I'll calculate the same stat for every runner using the same logic and the same kind of combination rules. And then I will sum them all up and then, take the average of them all and then divide them by that average, each one. So that way you get, if a horse is, 1 or 5% faster than the average horse in the race. So I create these normalized features. And I find that normalization is really important. You have to do that. Otherwise, the standardization just really helps from a modeling point of view, and a comparison against the field as well. And it's a bit more readable as well.
Yeah, in particular when you need to then be able to automate.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, we've got a similar question for Shaun about, again, dealing with trainers, but from a slightly different angle. So funnily, we'll come down to normalization, I think. Shaun, how do you deal with large stables? So let's say 2,400 meter race, and a particular trainer, let's say someone like Waller, has 5 or 6 runners. So, he may also have a lot of owners that he was considering in the mix there. Do you take that as part? Obviously, I'm from Tassie. Tassie, we have like 70% of our races runners from the same stables. What's your take on that?
No, it has no effect on what I would do or what I would assume. We have to have an expectation to a great extent that the horses are presenting to win the race. The stewards are there to ensure no team riding, no team tactics, and so on and so forth. So I don't have a concern about that. Now, I'd say pose one thing. This does tend to happen with the distance races. I very seldom, I bet probably 90% of my bets would be in races 1,200 metres to really no more than 2,200 metres. So for me, to some extent, those 2,400 metres don't matter so much when it does become prevalent. But I would not try to assume knowledge of something that is an impossibility to know. So you can't assume that they're making, deciding who's going to win the race this day, that day, and don't become concerned about that. I think just treat the horse and the race on its merits. Certainly the market fluctuations will help guide you as to, the probability of runners. But I don't think it's especially true that the horse is backed, and it's not something I've studied, but I don't think it's especially true that if Waller's got 6 runners in a field, the one they back is the one they're all backing, that's what they like it, and there's anything untoward about it. It's no different to if there were 6 runners from 6 different trainers.
So a good insight and something that I think, again, you can take a view on, regardless of whether you're programmatic or not in your approach. Yeah. Tom, there's one here about inputs to your model. Do you consider speed of horse or race one of your inputs?
Yeah, so I guess my interpretation of this is I'm using historical race speeds that a horse has run. And what I'll do is I'll aggregate those. So I'll take the last one, the second last race, the average of the last 10 races, the total average of the entire history of speeds. I'll average speed at same distance, all these kind of things. So as many different variations as you can. That's how I incorporate
presumably
it.
Another approach, was it Bruno last time who was talking about it, was the other approach there isn't just to take the speed that they've run, the time they've run, but the distance between the winner and them, because then that sort of benchmarks against, because they are competitive, we're all competitive, that it's not just your time over that speed, it's your time relative to other people spend too much time around racing.
I think one thing, if I can just make some little comment on that, the speed of a horse and the way how fast a horse can run from point A to point B is clearly what means a horse is either a fast horse or a slow horse. And so it's true that we look at the overall times, but you must look at the times, and this is why things like sectional times become such a important thing, because you need to consider all of the pieces of the puzzle, not simply one piece being the final time or the overall time. You need to consider how much the time is swayed by early time, late time, and mid time, and that's a bigger factor to from certainly from a time ratings point. And we haven't sort of discussed time ratings versus handicap ratings versus these type of things, but that's a big sway in when you're looking at time ratings is what how the horse has, is it offered a slow pace that horses can run home fast. Now, all horses, if they've had a jog, are going to be able to sprint quickly for 200 meters. That doesn't mean that that race should be necessarily poor because the overall time's slow. You need to consider what was the early sectional against the late sectional and things like this. What is, the contrast, compare and contrast those. So that'd be my comment to that.
Totally.
Bruno's just chimed in and he is saying something not quite same but similar, just adding context to what I said earlier about his comment last time. He compares runner time against the best of the night, which again is another proxy for, how did you compare on this day with, other similar, races, which I think is another, we talk about features, but it's another way to look at it, right?
Yeah, so comparing run 1,200 meter races on the same day and being able to look at it is very strong and very good idea. But again, you've got to take it into that context. I'm not sure, the greyhounds may be a little different. They, tend to probably run at top speed just for as long as they can and then stop. Whereas the racing,
a little bit less strategy.
Yeah, correct. So though sometimes I think we should just let the horses do that. But yes, the racing, that's a separate entity discussion point, the way it works. But yes, being able to compare is very good. But simply saying, "Oh, this horse came home in the fastest sectionals of the day at this day on a race," may not again allow for the fact that it was a very, very slowly run race and the horse had all of that energy to expend in one quick sprint. So you've got to take it all into context.
I like that. I've got a question here for you, Shaun, around your preference for the 12 to 2,200 meter races. Is there some logic for why you like that? Yeah. And then as a follow-up, is there potentially a best way to think about categories within that range? Are there a couple of sort of subsets that you might focus on?
So, I mean, I don't disregard them. I don't, and I should say, 1,000 meter, 1,100 meter races, I'd still bet into that 800 meter squibs. I'm not real keen on. The reason being is that, well, there's multiple reasons. One is that you're getting to a subset of horse that is really a specialist distances. You're getting to subsets of horses that are really, only some horses are capable of running extremely fast time over 1,000 meters. Only some horses are capable of running very long distances. So you're getting to the extremes of their ability and the stamina of a horse, and particularly the way we train and the way we have the horses here. We're not, pumping out massive amounts of 2,400 meter runners and 2,800 meter runners and 3,200 meter runners. So there's that reason. The second reason, particularly around the distance races, is once it becomes a specialist type distance, you often see horses that will go, in a spell, to get to the 2,400, they may run a 1,400 meter first up, then a 1,200, a 1,600, a 2,000, and then get up to the 2,400 meters. Well, in the way that my computer works or our computer works, we're using a recency bias to help do our predictions. And I've got to then be able to factor in that horse over 12 or 1,600 meters is not going to be capable of winning. So it will suppress their rating on those runs. Then if you take that into account in your algorithm at the end to try and predict what it's going to do over 2,400 meters, you may have a very different answer if you purely look at its 2,400 meter runs. If you then look at a horse, over 2,400 meters, it may only have very few data points of 2,400 meter runs. So again, you're starting to look at subsets of data that start to become small. And once you get to those distances, it is at the extreme of what our horses are capable of doing. So I prefer to have things, I'd like to have horses that are, you don't have to worry so much about it. Now, it is true that a horse can be very good at 1,400 meters, not so good at 1,600 meters, but it's not as extreme as that. I'm not sure if that was overly clear, but yeah, that's
no, it really is. When we got a response already saying that was really useful. The only thing I'll come back on is there a way that you would subdivide between 1,200 and 24? Like, how do you think about the distances between those? Or is it just one chunk in your head? I don't think.
No, I wouldn't subdivide that. And as again, I bet Turidan on Saturday into the 2,500 meter race. But so I don't throw them out, and I don't focus purely on anything. But I'd certainly like to target that sort of band. I do like the 12 to sort of 1600 metre races for whatever reason. Again, you often see in those brackets horses running consistently over those type of distances. You're not so worried about horses stepping up greatly in distance, down greatly. So, I mean, there's a lot of other things that I look at. Where the horse is positioned in run when they're going up distances, down distances. We could be here for 3 hours. So, but there's no specific bracket, but I do just, and you see a lot of those horses. I mean, 2500 metre horses generally, they're winning 1, 2, 3, 4 races out of 20, and they can be seen as a good horse. I like to try and find things that are a little bit more consistent.
Tom, do you have a distance sort of range that you prefer to, or your model's more successful over? Is that part of a filter that you use, or just
I don't filter on distance, but I really appreciate your answer, Shaun. So I think maybe then I should, particularly about the
retraining.
Limiting, particularly around the limit of what our horses are kind of trained to do, and I think it's wise to kind of avoid being too close to those limits from a modeling point of view as well. So this is something for me to consider. But yeah, I don't filter on that.
It's funny watching you two. You couldn't get much different from the two of you in a lot of ways, but it's interesting how much what both of you say comes back to the same set of things. You want consistency. You want something that you can understand. You want, you don't want a lot of unexpected outcomes, throwing your ways as you go through. And it's interesting. At the end of the day, you're both using different approaches to try and get to the same point, right? I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. I've got one last one here, which I don't know how complicated your answer to this one will be. I was starting with you, Shaun, because you might have an opinion too, Tom, but it's talking about sort of medium-term futures markets. So what attributes do you use to model upcoming races different runners will run in when you're looking at getting value from those medium-term futures markets? So, are there a few attributes you might pull out? And are they different from just, normal, day of the race markets?
I wouldn't traditionally bet too much into futures markets. One of the principal reasons, another variance in what we have seen over time, there's two things. The markets are much tighter than they've ever been. The percentage basically on the boards is much tighter than it's ever been, in my experience. And even when you find one that you may think is slightly wrong, the ability to actually get a bet on doesn't exist for most of us now. And I think that's terribly wrong, but anyway, that's the way that it works. I wouldn't say that there's anything particularly different. The difficulty there is then trying to, like anything, is trying to find when the horse is likely to reach a peak. So everything I'm doing is trying to find a pattern or a reason or a set of circumstances that is going to provide for a horse to peak. And that is what I'm looking for day in, day out. And that's what the computer's looking for, and the computer is doing by looking at what all the horses are likely to do today. So that from a futures perspective is what I'm going to be looking to do. Something like, betting into a Melbourne Cup or a Caulfield Cup or, any other futures market is not something I'd regularly do. But I would want to see, we'll talk quickly about that, some of the horses coming up. I want to be able to see that they're going to present into the race at their right time. Some horses go better at first up, second up, third up, fourth up. When you start looking at those individuals, so a classic one you talked about, leaving with a couple of horses that may or may not, go well. You want to look for something that's going to be peaking at that point. So if I know, I can say Eduardo, let's say, for example, going into this Everest, that I think is possibly an overlay right now into the Everest, it is going to go in there and present second up, and we'll second up last prep. It's a very small data. It's only sort of a couple of points of data, but second up, it just ran extraordinary rating last time, second up. So I can see exactly what they've done with this horse. They've turned around and said, okay, we can see that, we recognise that. The trainers recognise that, so they're going to run tomorrow, Saturday, and then run into that and try and do the exact same thing and try and present that. So one of the good things to look at is, have I seen a horse that I like that's done something similar? So, and in their pattern. So another one that I think's, it's like a Caulfield Cup horse. Do I want to see a horse go third or fourth up into a Caulfield Cup? I want to look for things like that rather than, but again, it's not something I would overly bet into.
I like it. And it's very different conversation we normally have on these things, which is awesome. And the response was really good insight. So thank you very much. I want to ask you one more, Tom, before we sort of wrap up. I know we're a little over time, so thanks, guys, for sticking with that. But just obviously, we all got into a groove, and it's everyone's enjoying it, so it's really cool. My question for you, Tom, was: can you share a little bit about you've got your model? We've talked about that. How do you bet your model? High level. Obviously, it's automated. I know that. But are you offering? Are you taking? Are you using SP? Obviously to the level you're comfortable sharing, but in terms of how you strategize your model, like we said at the beginning, having a rating is only the first bit. Where do you go from there and what you do?
Yeah, so what I do is I have my predicted price, and then I'm comparing it against what's available in the market.
Yeah.
And I see that high point and I go, ooh, I think there's value here, of a gap here. Then I then need to decide, okay, where am I going to choose my point? So do I put it at where I think it should be and then try to only get that much? Or do I put it closer to what's available at the market? And that way I'll only be able to get a little bit matched. So I definitely have not finessed this as much as I would like. But my current way is actually to choose a midway point. I don't want to go at the very base of what my model is saying the true price should be, because then if my model's wrong, I'm going to be losing money in the long term. And I don't want to go at the best available price because I just won't get enough matched. So obviously I'm betting, pre the off. And my logic is there that I need to get in before all the smart money eats away at all the edge that I've got. Because my data is certainly not the best data that there is. So other models out there will be able to extract more information from it. So I'm trying to go early enough that there still is, like Shaun said, like the markets are early on are relatively inefficient. So that's what I'm trying to take advantage of. So yeah,
when
I
actually take early on. Is that 5 minutes out, 3 minutes out? Like how far out, ballpark?
Oh, I start like observing the market from about 30 minutes before the jump, but I won't place bets straight away, and then it'll kind of track along for a little while. But I haven't tried earlier than 10 minutes. I would probably like to do that to see. My feeling is that it gets sharper and sharper, but there's more opportunity to get cash on. That's just the nature of the game. More offers are coming in and you can see the volume matched going up and what's available, So this is still an area where I haven't got a great deal of expertise yet, but currently my safety strategy is go somewhere in the middle of what my model thinks the true price is and what's available. And, that way I'm going to hopefully get a decent amount matched, but I'm also leaving enough buffer that any crappiness or errors in my model don't cause me to be negative EV.
Can I ask, and I don't really mind who answers this, but do either of you have an opinion on how much better than your model? I know that you've sort of said, Shaun, that it varies on the runner and so on, but I've heard people come up to me and talk about, strategies and go, oh, I just want 10% better than my price. And my first thing is to go, well, 10% better than 220, I get that. 10% better than 20 at 22, you probably don't want. Do you have do you bracket what you're doing? Do you go in this price range based on either available or my rating or whatever? I need more of a margin here and less of a margin here. What does that play into which price you're prepared to take there, or is it literally just linear across the board, hands off?
So no. Well, from my perspective, one of the first things I do is, or one of the things I consider is doing a market at less than 100%. So if you do your market, to even 95 or 90%, you're already building in a error rate or an error factor or an error room for error. It's not the right term, but so I think you can play around with that sort of philosophy. If you're doing a market 100%, and as the market starts to form, gets down to, let's say, a top fluck of around 108%, you're ending up having a lot more bets. Whatever the market, with Betfair, you're getting down to the 100%, of course.
102, I hope.
100. Well, sorry, I'm talking more the wider market. But if we're just talking about Betfair, you're then going to expose yourself to be having a lot of bets. And to me, I think that's partly what I would say to someone trying to look at that. I'm building in that error rate and that room for error straight into my market in that way. So I'm not then juggling with it at the time to say, oh, it's a 10% overlay or a 2% overlay or whatever.
That helps to distribute it across the market.
And I think as we discussed at the top, I am very aware of what the market's doing. So I'm not fixated on my price being 3-1 and that's just it. I'm certainly using a wisdom of crowds type model to influence what I'm doing. So and to me, that's partly why for me kind of automation is difficult, because I don't want to just stick rigidly. I think I've got a very good answer, but sticking just absolutely blindly, rigidly to it, I have found to be difficult. And I make a better profit having, taking all these things into consideration for when I'm trading. Talking about time of betting and efficiency of market, obviously the closer it gets to the end, it's more efficient, but that's where you can obviously get the volume. So it is a catch-22. But, and I'm not here to promote betting bookmakers over Betfair, but you have to take all things into account when you're trying to be profitable. That's just a fact of the matter. You've got to be looking at all different opportunities in the market. And it does become a little bit of game theory, and you want to bet prior to the other person betting. Are they going to bet now and we're going to bet now? And we've seen that in forever. The syndicates used to all be on course, keeping an eye on each other, and it's exactly the same thing. It's not as exposed, but you can certainly see. I think there's plenty of signals that tell you that a horse is about to firm prior to it firming. You just got to find them.
It's an interesting one from that perspective, Tom. So you said in terms of looking at what the price is and factoring that into your into the price you're prepared to take. But outside of that, do you use the wisdom of the crowd as part of your judgment? Like we were saying with Shaun earlier, that differential between your rating versus the market price is that part of what you consider, or are you? Your rating doesn't change.
No, my models take the crowd knowledge as inputs. So 100%. I found very early on that using just purely form and results history data, I was not able to get very close to what the market accuracies were. I think I could get to sort of about 70% as good, which is still terrible and nowhere near good enough to find any edge. So, but as soon as I incorporated some price signals into the model, it went right up to as very close to as accurate as the market was. Well, I mean, obviously, and then even improve on it at that point in time. So, yeah. You got to use the prices.
You have to take the SPs into consideration when you're forming your opinions. So you need to weight that into your models. But you also then, after you've done your predictive models, I think you then have to use that, what the market is doing, and blend it with your market. There's not many people that I know of that have proven successful by purely betting their number is being fixated and being right. In fact, there'd be, count on one hand, probably the number of people in Australia that could be successful at that.
I'm a big fan of considering the market, because the wisdom of the crowd is such a good indicator, right?
And
like
it's just
said,
about
if it's
then
way off on you, they probably know something you don't.
Yeah, and it's about then understanding the noise from the signal, right?
Yeah, and so about signal, Shaun. Obviously, this one's very interesting. So take what you will or won't. But are there any points of what those shortening signals look like that you might be happy to share about what things people might look for, either manually or programmatically? Obviously, weight of money is relevant.
Yeah, I think
velocity of money, or
no, but I think also one of the biggest problems, and I think with the exchange, again, it's, I won't say it's a problem, but when you're trying to read the market, very few professional syndicates are going to bet in large lumps. So when you start seeing very large lumps, I tend to assume that that's not a great signal. Because majority of the professional syndicates are going to bet in smaller increments to try and drive. Yeah, correct. So I like to see, if I'm looking in, without discussing completely, I like to see a little bit of momentum within it. I'm not too concerned. I mean, of course, I don't want $5 to be influencing me either, but I'm not too concerned about the huge volumes. It will drive it off, but in my experience, quite often the big volumes also bounce back. So you see a big volume coming in at a market that's under. That is the thing. So I'm probably more about a steady move, but I'm also, you have to consider all the different elements. You have to look at what's happening with the wider marketplace to understand what Betfair may likely do. And that there is both are driving each other. It's all in the one ecosystem. The fixed odds markets are helping drive Betfair, and Betfair's helping drive the fixed odds market. It's not, I don't believe, correct to say one is absolutely true over the other, or one has more influence over the other. You have to be monitoring. And, I'm not saying, once you see things start to firm, they're going to keep firming. You do have to try and discount some of the large movements, but and this is part of the again, probably possibly if I teamed up with Tom, I could get some more expertise on it. But again, from a modelling point of view, you need to understand how to automate your betting and understand that. But don't ignore the market. That's one thing I would say. It's very, very difficult to ignore the market.
I like that, and I like that you both agree on it too.
100%. Yeah.
So absolutely fascinating. So thank you both. I'm sorry that it's a bit late, but there were just so many questions in such a good conversation. I didn't want to cut it off. I am going to just finish by asking Shaun for something I don't normally ask for, but I knew some people would lynch me if I didn't. We're coming into spring racing, Shaun. I'm not going to ask Tom because he won't have a clue. I'm not sure he understands the question, let alone the answer. But Shaun, do you have any recommendations for the runners we should be keeping an eye out for this season? Any opinions that you can share?
No, look, I think looking at the Cups, someone asked me about the Caulfield Cup, Melbourne Cups today, and I said, well, I'm going to mock up the races in the next sort of couple of days now that the weights are out. She's Ideals run well to look for a Caulfield Cup. I think Colette is primed for an extreme peak in one of her next couple of runs, and so I think that'd be an interesting horse. But she may need some rain for a Caulfield Cup should she go there or end up there. Yeah, look, I'm excited about some of these good horses. I think Zaki is a star. Incentivize I was against on Saturday, but that wasn't really well, it wasn't a really good result for me. It was my worst race of the weekend for sure. So look, a couple of these horses are potentially really top line. I did mention Eduardo. I think Eduardo is going to run a big race in the Everest. It just depends how much pressure he's going to have to put up with, but probably Eduardo there, and maybe hopefully a little rain and maybe Colette into the Caulfield Cup.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I mean, Tom, you can chime in if you'd like, but you might need some time to run the model.
Yeah, I'll pass.
Thank you
I look
both.
for answers on most days rather than trying to find a Caulfield Cup winner. It's hard enough to find it on the day. So, and as I talked about, the 2,400 metre races, I like Group 1 2,400 metre races. So I should preface that. I do like betting into the better quality 2,400 metre races. But just when we talked about earlier about the other ones, that's where I discount a lot of those other 2,400 metre races. But I'm a little contradictory of myself to then say, oh, I don't mind Colette in a Caulfield Cup. But that would be the preface for that answer. Yeah.
Thank you both. And I appreciate that you're coming from exceptionally different places, but it's really interesting how many things you had pretty similar opinions on at the end of the day, just with different lenses. So hopefully someday we'll be in the same state, in the state that isn't in lockdown, and we can do this at a pub and keep chatting more organically. But thank you both for the time. I really appreciate you both giving it. Yeah, really, really grateful. Both of the guys are in the Slack community. Sean has very kindly joined to be able to take conversations after this. And Tom's obviously an old faithful of the community. So if you've got any follow-up questions, there are a couple that we didn't get to here. You know, you think of afterwards, go, crap, what I missed? Please feel free to shoot them in the meetups channel over on the Slack community, and the guys that have kindly enough said they'll jump in there. Otherwise, thank you all. Great to have the time, and I hope we can do this in person sometime soon.
No problem.
And more generally, thank you both. Thank you for the questions, guys, and everyone stay safe, and hope to see you soon.
Cheers.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.